Welcome everybody to my Thanos build, where my first decision was to decide whether I wanted to look like a human or an orc. I decided on orc, but the pointy ears make me think it really should have been a human. In this video, in the first part, I'm going to take you through how I set up Thanos in Age of Wonders 4, the decisions, choices that I made, and then of course into the gameplay for some highlights of how it played out and what kind of strategies I ended up having to adopt. For starters here, and of course there'll be time cards below if you'd like to skip through, I was choosing my traits. I decided to go with strong because that just makes sense, and I backed it up with ferocious. Maybe not the best pick on ferocious, but it ended up working out well enough. Part of the reason why I chose it was because the culture decision actually ended up being quite a difficult one. I'd initially ruled out 3, feudal, industrious, and mystic. I decided they just weren't quite right, they didn't fit with the lore that I was trying to build. However, we do have the high culture, which as well as having fantastic armor that I think broadly suits, it also has this alignment agenda. So we can get extra food and production per city stability level above neutral, and we'll get this awakened ability if we can make it all the way through to pure evil. The other sort of obvious one, of course, is barbarian, people who thrive on war and aggression with structures to suit that, and this ritual, which I think is really in line of that kind of Thanos dictatorial leadership that we're going with here. So Barbarian was also a strong contender alongside Dark. Dark, I thought, because it aligns sort of the opposite of high. Light, in this case it's dark, it's evil. We have Coal the Weak and a natural negative alignment alongside some reasonable buildings that perhaps don't quite gel with the build. Eventually I went with high for the alignment agenda, for the city stability, awakened, all that kind of stuff, but actually also, to be honest, for the armor as well, because part of this is about how we look. But before we get on to the unfortunate story of looks, society traits are another big factor that'll feed in. In fact, they're actually the whole design for this build. I thought about things like Ruthless Raiders, and there are many other good picks, but my Thanos looks a little something like this. 2 special traits out of the Pantheon. The first, Chosen Destroyers. Raising cities gives us a huge amount of yield, gold, mana, and knowledge. However, we cannot obtain new cities, and also free cities will really hate me. I am, after all, the invader of this world, so that kind of makes sense. I toyed around a little bit, maybe picking up a bit of evil here too, a really great trait, and of course, all this kind of stuff feeds in well. But to complete this build, I think it really has to be perfectionist artisans. Our city structures cost twice as much in terms of production, but they grant us some stability. So there's some internal synergy here, as well as granting me extra gold. And that is really the key. 2 things together here. I'll be limited to 1 city, its production will cost twice as much, but I have loads of stability and gold benefits to leverage off it as I seek to destroy the world. For my tome choice, I initially thought maybe I'll grab Tome of Souls first. For the Soul Collector, I think that could be an interesting pathway for this build. And of course, there are some other reasonable spells and stuff inside of this tome. The Shadow thing, of course, I am naturally going to be evil, but I'm also sort of a high order-based person. And that's why I think that this build works quite well on the lore side, as well as in-game. It's actually a pretty fun and decent build. I ended up going with Tome of the Horde, not for Spawnkin, although it is brilliant, but because I think it's kind of the other second option. In fact, I'll end up taking both of these tier 1 tomes throughout. Now there's one last decision. Do I want to be a Wizard King? I mean, yeah, absolutely. The stones have lots of magical powers, and I'm sure you could structure it that way, but no, I'm going to take Champion. Mainly for the extra gold and stability, because those are 2 key parts of this build. Now let's talk lore, as I try and set up someone that looks like Thanos. Of course, here he is on your screen. We're playing through the Infinity War story, where Thanos is retired out to the farm, literally, not like the family pet. He is, of course, interrupted. He has to come back and kick Earth's butt, because Earth won't settle for having half of their population wiped, so he's going to wipe them all. The only downside was I couldn't really find purple, and I kind of ended up looking like a Guardian of the Galaxy, just a little bit. Now let's move through and take a look at the gameplay. Of course, some of the features of this build are that I start with a tier 3 unit, a very powerful Awakener, and of course, that 1 city cap, which while we can raise it artificially later, we're limited by Chosen Destroyers in founding new cities. Thankfully for me, someone who is pretty keen to fight, to get out there, to level up my units and get some extra gear, I was gifted by an infestation right next door. easily able to equip my budget Thanos, but we have Thanos at home, Mum said. No, we don't. No, we don't, kids. Moving along to the development tree, this is obviously another key part, infestations granting me rewards right from the start, and the chaos tree will continue to be a focus for me, because there's a strong focus around getting rewards from destroying units, getting gold, summoning in an army is as well something I'll draw on, and of course things like the extra city cap, not so hot, except for heroes. The maternity skill, Materium skill, I mean to say, could be useful for founding additional outposts, and then of course there are a couple around the edges that I want to try and grab as well, out of nature, as well as, of course, shadow, but I'll get plenty of shadow down the line. The other factor to note that makes this build super interesting is that obviously everything's really expensive, and we only have one city. The cost on this stuff is insane, so obviously it makes sense to use my Imperium at the start to reach out and grab the boosts for the buildings, because if we've ever needed boosted buildings, it's in this build. We only have one city, and it takes twice as long to build everything as normal. So getting my library, my vendor, all that sort of stuff, super important. Equally, we need to start going out and raising some cities. And with the free cities nearby already not liking me, they obviously make a fantastic target. As early as turn 12, I rocked up to the one that I thought was next door to me, but actually there was one even closer than this. And we need to start taking them down. Because of course this build is all about, on the lore side, just purging the earth, purging this planet of these wrongdoers. But then in terms of the in-game side, there's a real need to burn down the cities. Why? Well, of course, because we are the Chosen One, and through that Chosen One ability, we're going to get 40 extra gold, 20 extra mana, and 20 extra knowledge for doing exactly what I've done here, kicking their butt, and of course raising the city. And here it is in all of its glory, right? We get these benefits, the knowledge, mana, gold income, every turn forever. And we also of course get the reward just for raising it, which happens to be a pretty 375. Naturally, of course, no one's really going to like me that much. In fact, no one in this game likes me at all. But so long as I keep grievances on my side, I'll still be able to enact justified wars, and that'll help me with my Imperium. Of course, the other big part of the build is this. It's trying to place down outposts to pick up things like magic materials or ancient wonders. Here, that's exactly what I've done, clearing out a wonder to level up, gear up my dudes, and grab some extra yield. Oh, remember that city-state I mentioned earlier? Well, here they are. They're actually almost a stone's throw away. I'm embarrassed I didn't walk to the right. But you know what? It didn't really matter because we're getting all the rewards, including, of course, knowledge as well as souls, because souls will be a pretty important part as we move through. Speaking of moving through, there are some tomes of magic that I would recommend, but actually there's quite a bit of flexibility in this build. You can't really go wrong with choosing your A-tier tomes, like Amplification, which could absolutely be a reasonable pick to start moving up that branch of the Empire development tree. Maybe lean into souls a bit more. For me, though, I actually ended up unlocking the Archer in Tome of Winds. I think it's a really good archer. Do I have huge order, high synergy with it? No, not necessarily, but I think it's a reasonable unlock for me because I'm going to be pumping out units. Because, of course, we have an enemy to take down. And actually, in this playthrough, I've managed to get such an early and aggressive start, rolling through the city-state, picking up the extra rewards. I decide, you know what? I'm already very evil. Let's slam down onto this throne city, turn 28, now, of course, having moved through, and then they ambush me out of nowhere. And they overpower me. But they don't have any heroes. This is a crucial turning point in the game. And despite, as you can see, ultimately, of course, Thanos Destroyer of Worlds comes out pretty successfully. It set me back a great deal. They just had too many units for me to push so aggressively at the start. And I think that's a key lesson to take away, is that there will be a little bit of a ramp-up time with this build. Unlike potentially other builds, and even though we start with a powerful tier 3 unit, it's not really enough to necessarily push us over the edge. We need to burn down a couple of city-states first before we step in and start to take down the obviously inevitably stronger AI. I'm also happy to let them place little cities like they have here, because every city that I burn down is more reward for me. The other key part here, as we jump ahead slightly, is this: the major race transformation. I've decided that in this build we will be the undead life stealers. Most of Thanos' army in the final film are heinous undead creatures. I'll also be leaning in here to nature because I want to pick up super growth, I think, and I also kind of want to have summon greater animal unlocked. The other thing to note here is that I want to pick up a nature affinity, so it's 3 birds with 1 stone. There are many other good things as we start to move through and build a bit more strategy, like gaining mana and knowledge, taking a city, and crucially this one right here, war slaves. Huge. Every time we raise a city, we ship back 1/4 of its population back to our capital, allowing it to grow and grow even further. And that, my friends, is exactly what I do a little bit later than I'd planned on turn 48, with ultimately the power of super growth behind me, because of course Thanos is huge. Ignore his pointy ears, okay? It's Thanos, I swear. And now that we're extra huge, we've got some more powerful units. We're making $2,000 from burning down a city, and all of those other benefits that continue to roll through. The penalties from only having 1 city and from not being able to found more cities really start to fall away. And of course, it goes without saying probably that this is a domination victory, so we'll also need to hunt down the enemy rulers. Thankfully for me, they were standing idle by fairly close, and we'll of course pick up some evil alignment as we send them through to the void. Back on the sort of city development side of things, your capital will be starting to get quite big, especially once you start to bring in those war slaves. You'll be using that to reach out and grab more territories, and city stability will never, ever be a problem. We are stacking stability high and generating quite a bit of yield from it. At this point, I'm at war with basically every single person, so training units every turn is important, particularly with only 1 city, right? Because I'm limited to 1 unit per turn being trained. I should also rely on my greater animals, of course, a little bit, right? To try and summon units in as well, as I move across and periodically, systematically declare war on each person in front of me, reinforcing my undead units with spells to heal them, summoning in beasts, and trying where I can to shelter in an outpost, because at the moment, I don't quite have the ability to heal outside of friendly territory, although of course the Shadow Affinity will handily unlock that for us later in the game. As I've been moving through, picking up a little bit of Materium as well, you would have noticed. I know, not necessarily the best branch, but I think it's very useful, particularly for our siege and for a couple of those unit unlocks. So I've moved through and picked up that kind of thing, and now I'm in a really formidable spot. The real holdback, the real drawback for me now is that 1 city. Not because its yields are low, but instead because I can only produce 1 unit per turn. So hurrying production is huge. We're also getting quite a bit of knowledge, obviously, and that's allowing me to reach through into the next tier of Tome. In this case, I'm going to go for Harvest Population and reach right up into Tome of the Reaper at tier 4, because I need to get away to reliably get more souls so that we can get our major race transformation off. The Summon Reaper unit unlock and the Construct Soul Siphons are all actually really useful for this hyper-aggressive domination build. Don't forget though, as you're playing through, you can pop back and get some other tomes for their affinities and their sheer power. Moving through into my next siege, where again there's just no one guarding the city. Are they so afraid of Thanos that they've fled? We reap the rewards. We reap the gold to insta-purchase our expensive buildings and our units, and I send out a disgusting worm of a raiding party to again hunt down a cowardly enemy ruler that isn't protecting their city, but is instead, gallivanting off in the countryside. I suppose they don't have much longer to enjoy their precious countryside once Thanos is done with this world. And indeed, Thanos will be. Now, this enemy in particular was incredibly outclassed, and will send another one to the Shadow Realm, but more importantly, it's another city burnt. I can also use my Harvest Population, finally, as we were talking about earlier, thanks to reaching up through the tomes, to get my final major part of this build, and it's a major race transformation, Undead. This will give us lifesteal, temporary hit points, and really, I think, complete a lot of the lore around Thanos' army. It is a shame that I also become undead, but just cool those battle scars and don't look at the pointy ears. And to bring the whole thing to a close, I'm coming to force with the other major power in the game. I have 4 siege slots thanks to our focus on Materium, and plenty of projects to harvest souls or deal direct damage. At this point, my armies have loads of experience. They're also life-stealing off the enemy as they fight them, among the many other things that we've pieced into this build, and as you can see, completely and utterly wiped the floor with my enemy. And that completes this build on what was, I should note, a close spawn start world. I think it pays to keep the enemy cities nice and close. But other than that, I didn't change a dang thing. Thank you very much for joining me. It's my first time making this kind of video, so I'd love your feedback below if you liked it, and I'll see you next time.